Here's a story. Who we are. Everyone is someone in their own home. Warriors and farmers and slaves, mused Odin. Some are wise, some are fools. Some are generous, some stingy. Some rely on themselves, some on others. Some are rich, some poor. Some beautiful, some ugly. Some are curious, and some blind to all the wonders of Midgard. And to tell the truth, ever since I and my brothers Vili and Ve fashioned the first human beings from two fallen trees, an ash and an elm, most people are a mix of all these things. Each person is made of many ingredients. Odin reached up and stroked his raven Hugin, who was sitting on his right shoulder. But one thing is missing, one thing from each man and woman and child on Middle-earth. Not one of them has a divine spark. Not one is a descendant of the gods. For some while, Odin sat in his highest seat, gazing out across the 9 worlds. I will send Heimdall, the son of 9 mothers, to Middle-earth, so that human beings will become more than flesh and bone, and blood and bone. How beautiful Middle-earth is! How sheerly beautiful, thought Heimdall, the watchman of the gods. All the little ponds and pools noticing the sky, the rocks almost orange and bronze and seal gray, the moss almost luminous. And how good to be alone. All day the sun hurried west, chased by the wolf's call, and just before dusk the gray clouds closed around her. Then white veils of rain drifted in, and Heimdall got soaked. He wasn't sorry when he saw a wooden hut with smoke rising from its turf roof. He knocked on the door, and the door creaked and swung open. Heimdall ducked under the lintel and stepped into a smoky room. Sharp-eyed as he was, he could scarcely see the tip of his own nose. Heimdall coughed. "Anyone at home?" A very old man and a very old woman, sitting on wooden tubs on either side of the fire, stretched and slowly stood up. "Am I welcome?" asked Heimdall. "All our guests are welcome," replied the old man. "Not too welcome, I hope, or they'll eat you out of house and home," the old woman cackled. "Without much trouble," she added. When Heimdall's eyes were accustomed to the smoke and the half-light, the god could see how dingy and sparsely furnished the hut was, and yet it was all very neat and clean. The marble floor was swept and glossy. The low pine table was scrubbed, and the large wooden rug was scruffy but unstained. "We make do," the old woman observed. "This rain, though, it makes it a right mess of our yard, all sludge and slime." "Yes," Heimdall said. "Well, we must all make do. Humans aren't born equal. Each of us must make the most of ourselves." "What is your name?" the old man asked politely. "Rig," said Heimdall. "And yours, if I may ask?" "Edda," the old woman said. "Edda and I. Great-grandmother, great-grandfather." In the welcoming warmth of the hut, the drenched god began to steam like Edda's old iron pot, hanging over the fire. The god sniffed. "I could eat a roasted ox, he declared. "Not within these walls," said Edda, with a rueful smile. "But you're welcome to share what we have." And before long she gave the god a bowl of vegetable broth and hunks of husky bread. They were sufficient to fill the god's stomach, though, and what with walking all day, he soon began to yawn. "You can sleep between us," Edda told him. "That way you won't feel the draft." So that night the god lay in the middle of the rough reed matting in one corner of the room, and Edda spread the large woolen rug over all 3 of them. Indeed, Heimdall stayed for 3 nights, and then he thanked I and Edda for their warm welcome and went on his way. 9 months passed, and Edda gave birth to a son. He had thick black hair, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he certainly knew how to yell. Edda and I sprinkled fresh water over him, and they called him Thrall. From day to day and year to year, Thrall looked more coarse. His skin was as rough as sandpaper, his knuckles were knotted, his spine was curved, and his heels too big for his feet. Still, no one could say he wasn't a good worker, plowing, slopping out, spreading muck, feeding the hens, searching for deadwood in the forest, hauling awkward branches back home, chopping and stacking. One day, though, Thrall found something else in the forest, something he couldn't take his eyes off of. Her name was Thur. She was bandy-legged, and her soles were damp and bark-stained. Her arms were peeling, and she had a squashed nose. Thur liked the look of Thrall, too, and before long they had a child, Fjösnir, the cowherd, and then 20 more. Between them they spread dung on the ploughed land around the hut, built fences around the pigsty, raised goats, and laid new green turf on the roof. So Heimdall and Ada, Thrall and Thur, and all their children are the ancestors of all the human beings living in Midgard, who are poor and hungry, and have to work for other people. And the divine spark shone within each one of them. After Heimdall had left the hut belonging to great-grandmother and great-grandfather, he swung his arms, he stretched his legs, and walked for 3 days until he came to a well-kept farmhouse. Although the barn right next to it wasn't in such good shape. It looked as if the corpse-eating eagle Hraesvelg had perched on the roof and given one flap of his wings and knocked the barn off balance. A man raised the stout bar across the door of the farmhouse, and Heimdall stepped in. "Am I welcome?" asked the god. "Everyone is welcome except for thieves and murderers," the farmer replied. "Then I'm welcome," said Heimdall with a smile, "and what a pleasing sight to see you shaping up a new beam for the loom, and your wife weaving. You both look smart, your combed hair and trimmed beard and leather jacket and breeches, your wife with her headband and smock and bronze shoulder brooches. I don't know. You make me look like a ragamuffin." The farmer laughed. "Travelers are travelers. They all look the same." "Yes, and I know that saying. As often as not, a man who sticks at home knows next to nothing about his guest." The god smiled. "True enough," he agreed. "What is your name?" the farmer asked. "Rig," said Heimdall. "And yours, may I ask?" "Afi," the farmer replied. "Afi and Amma, grandfather and grandmother." Before very long, Amma laid on the table rye bread, butter gold as a crocus, and a wooden platter heaped with boiled veal. Then she gave her guest a horn brimming with ale, and with one draught Heimdall drained it. "Nothing better," he announced. "Well, nothing except the horn that people can hear through the 9 worlds." "Oh," said Afi, "the ringing horn, you mean? The god Heimdall's horn." "That's the one," said Heimdall. He yawned. "With walking all day, I'm ready for sleep." At once, grandfather and grandmother courteously offered their guests the best place in the middle of the bed. And 9 months later, Amma gave birth to a baby son. Carl, that's what the farmer and his wife called him. He had chubby cheeks and sharp eyes. While he was still a boy, Carl learned to drive oxen and fasten the share and coulter to a plow, as well as how to build a timber frame for a farmhouse or a barn, or how to pitch the roof. Afi and Amma chose a wife for Carl. She was called Schnur, and very becoming she was. On her wedding day she rode in a wagon to her new home, dressed in goatskin and wearing a veil, and she had a bunch of jangling keys secured at her waistband. Before long, Snor gave birth to a baby son. She and Carl called him Hal. And then they had 11 more sons and 10 more daughters, strong and freemen and craftsmen, beardy and broad shoulders, slender and proud and bashful and worthy and graceful. All these and lots more. They were happy. So Heimdall and Amma, Carl and Snor, and all their children are the ancestors of all the human beings living in Midgard, who are freemen farmers, and the divine spark shone within each one of them. After Heimdall had left the farmhouse belonging to grandmother and grandfather, he continued his journey and walked for 3 days. Then in the blue hour, he came to a splendid building on a knoll overlooking the sea. The doors were wide open, and the passage inside was strewn with fresh rushes, laced with rosemary. Sitting in the room at the heart of the house were Mother and Father. Father was twisting bowstrings, and Mother was watching him and smoothing her shift, and then inspecting her arms for blemishes, and arranging and rearranging her forget-me-not gown. She was wearing 2 beautiful silver brooches between her shoulders and breasts. As for her neck, it was whiter than new snow. "Am I welcome?" asked the god. "But of course," replied Father. "Your name?" "Rig," the god told him. Mother smiled. "Welcome, Rig." Mother covered the table with a linen cloth, and laid on it great delicacies, slices of white bread, silver dishes charged with well-browned horse meat, and grouse and partridge, red wine and pitcher, in a pitcher, silver wine cups. Rig and father and mother ate and drank and talked until late, and then Rig slept between them on a mattress stuffed with the down of eider duck. 9 months later, mother gave birth to Jarl. His hair was very fair, his cheeks were pink, and his eyes fearsome as those of an adder, and the divine spark shone within him. Jarl learned how to thrust with a lance and parry with a shield. Like father, he learned how to twist a bowstring and how to loose arrows. He learned to ride and swim, and when the right moment to unleash hounds hunting for a fox or a wild boar. One morning, when Jarl was older than a young boy and younger than a man, he saw someone riding out of the forest and straight toward him. "Who are you?" asked Jarl. "My name is Rig," said the man. He was carrying a bundle of red wooden markers, and each had several signs carved on it. "What are they?" Jarl asked. "Runes," the man told him. "Magic sounds, secret meanings." Jarl took one of the markers and examined the sign on it. "What's this one?" he asked. "The sounds that put the wild sea to sleep." Jarl looked up at Rig, and the god saw at once how excited he was. "And this?" "The song that blunts the blade of a sword." "Really?" Then Jarl and the god sat down in the long grass, and all morning Rig showed him the red markers, each painted with different signs, and taught him the runes of life, their sounds, their magic. "And now I've this to tell you," the god said. "What?" asked the boy. He looked flushed. He felt short of breath. "Jarl, you are my son." Jarl stared at Rig. "I am Rig the king, and you will be Rig the king. But..." Then Rig told Jarl how he had come to the hall 13 years before, and how he had met mother and father. He embraced Jarl. "Now is the time to leave home," he advised Jarl. "The time to win your land and a hall for yourself. The time to gather your own followers. Now is the time to win your name." That's what the young man did. He left home. He ranged far and wide. He gathered around him his own followers and won their loyalty with his leadership and gifts of gold armbands and rings. When warriors accused him of trampling over their land and stealing their cattle and crops, he fought them. Jarl and his men stained the fields crimson. But by the time he was full grown, Jarl owned no fewer than 18 high halls, and his followers called him Rig the king. Then Jarl sent messengers to a lord called Hersir, asking him for the hand of his daughter Aina. What with her fine fingers and wrists and ankles, and her waterfall of fair hair, Hersir replied, "She may look delicate, but Jarl is making a shrewd choice. My daughter Aina. I've never met a young woman as accomplished and capable." So Aina married Jarl, and she gave birth to 12 sons and almost as many daughters, and the divine spark shone within each of them. Aina and Jarl's youngest son was called Kon, and when he was 12, his father taught him the 18 magic runes that Odin first learned when he hung for 9 nights on Yggdrasil. Kon at once fell under their spell. For hour after hour, while his elder brothers were out in the field hunting and learning their fighting skills, he sat and memorized the secret sounds and learned how to sing and say them and cut and color the markers for himself. Kon learned how to cure sickness and how to lighten a heavy, aching heart. He learned how to brace his arms and legs and snap ropes that bound him. He learned how to stop a flying arrow and to blunt the blade of an enemy's sword. He learned how to quench flames, save a ship in a storm, and win the love of a white-armed young woman. He learned how to loose a hanged man, swinging from a gallows tree, and bring him back to life. Yes, Kon learned the runes of life, and he knew that the magic you alone know is the strongest magic of all. One afternoon, Kon was ambling through the forest, amusing himself by calling down the birds and listening to them chatter. A crow clapped down and perched on a branch right over his head. "Kon," it croaked, "what do you think you are doing?" "Listening to you," said Kon. "That's what I'm doing. How do you know my name?" "That's my business," said the crow. "But no one else will know it or listen to you unless you stop wasting your time seducing birds. Isn't it time you left home? Do you know how many young men are already winning followers, winning land and high halls, winning fame?" Kon clenched his fists. "Why have you learned the runes if not to put them to work? You must prove yourself. Claim the name of young young Kon the king. Kon's blood quickened. It began to whirl around his body. "I will answer you," he called up to the crow. "I'll answer you with my shining sword. Yes, I'll sign it with the blood of my enemies." So the children of Heimdall and Mother and Jarl and Aina are the ancestors of all the human beings living in Midgard, who are nobly born. The divine spark shone within each one of them. It was Odin who raised the elm and the ash tree and breathed the spirit of life into them. But because of Heimdall, each woman and man and child on Middle Earth is descended from the gods.